Hello and welcome to the closing ceremony of Innovate for Climate 2022. Thank you for all your superb contributions on social media and for submitting your questions throughout these 3 days. It's been so fascinating to hear from all of our speakers and panellists. And you know what? There's a real feeling of mass inspiration about this conference. I know many of you have been telling us how motivated and informed you're feeling, and I know you're going to take this forward to amplify some of those solutions that you've been working on. Now, I know, I said this last year, but I really do mean this. I am extremely honoured to be part of this important conversation, and I look forward to discussing what we've heard with Juergen Voegele and fielding the questions that you would like him to answer. First of all, though, Valvanera Ulagi joins us. Valvanera is the Director General of the Spanish Climate Change Office at the Ministry for Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenge, and she has an important message for all of you.
Hello, it is a pleasure to be here with you in this closing session of I4C Congress, hopefully in its last virtual edition. You all know that during the last years, the Congress has evolved in a very flexible way, and it has been shaped in line with the context we have faced. Due to the circumstances, we turned virtual, but the power of the agenda, the level of the speakers, the participants, the interest of the solution discussed has not stopped. This difficult road has led us to a very positive takeaways, and we will incorporate all the knowledge gained in future events. It is a pleasure to confirm once more that our community has been strongly committed, and we are very happy to see that again this year. The results have been a complete success, with more than 182 countries represented, over 6,500 delegates, 3 plenary sessions with keynote speakers, 59 workshops, 19 exhibitors in the marketplace, 100 plus young climate innovators, and 22 journalists. We are glad about these figures, and we feel really proud to support this event, which becomes even more relevant in the current context, at a time in which the urgency to accelerate the transformation of our economies is key to go for emission-free and resilient models. We need a major change, and a change that needs efforts from all stakeholders. We need governments to develop tailored and coherent policies that give a clear signal of the goals and the direction towards which we all must move. And at that, enabling environments will create, a lot of innovation through all the society and at all levels. We need the business world also to be committed along these lines. We need them to understand that the environmental dimension and the decarbonization of the economy is a source of opportunities to modernize the industry, generate employment, and to increase competitiveness. We need also the financial sector to help us mobilize private and public resources and to ensure that investments move towards sustainability. And of course, and the most important part of all this challenge, the support of the society to achieve this deep transformation. People must be key drivers of the needed changes. They must be at the center of all of our actions. So make it possible for us, make it possible for a just transition world to a zero model in which no one is left behind. Congratulations, dear friends of the World Bank. The quality of the programs and the participants has been demonstrated in each activity of these 3 intense days of the Congress. We look to the future with optimism and will continue working on innovation, new technologies, climate-smart solutions, and new financing formulas. The world is changing, and we should change at the same pace, base our models in new structures within the governments and also within our companies. Renewables, energy efficiency, and social justice must be part of one holistic solution. In this sense, it is my pleasure to announce the dates of the next edition that will be held from 23 to 25 May next year. Save these dates in your agenda because the circumstances finally allow us. I4C will return in person with more strength, more enthusiasm, more action, and more success in the beautiful city of Barcelona. We are eager to see you all in person next year. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Valvanera. Thank you for joining us from Spain, and especially thank you for that really exciting news. I'm now going to welcome Juergen Voegele, Vice President for Sustainable Development, World Bank Group, to give us his chosen highlights of I4C 2022. Juergen, wonderful to be connected with you a year on. Can you believe it? Where did the time go? Before I ask you some questions from the audience, just tell me, what are your reflections of the event and what has been your highlight? If, of course, you can single out a single one.
Well, thank you, Anita. It's been a year, that's right. And thank you also for your brilliant hosting of Innovate for Climate once again this year. And also thank you to Valvanera. It's just wonderful to hear that Innovate for Climate will hopefully be in person next year. And I certainly do look forward to seeing many of you in Barcelona, in the beautiful city, one of my favorite places in Europe. But first, back to this year, I'm especially proud of the fact that Innovate for Climate has been such a success virtually, now 2 years in a row, that it has been open and inclusive with thousands of people. I think Valvanera mentioned 6,000 people joining remotely from all over the globe, sharing their experiences of turning the climate challenge into the climate action opportunity, because that's what we really need. We need a forward-looking approach to this. This, to me, is the essence of Innovate for Climate, bringing together the worlds of finance, of markets, of policy, of technology, to showcase what's possible, what's out there, the opportunities, and exchange knowledge and drive meaningful, high-impact action. I certainly thoroughly enjoyed the 3 packed plenaries with leaders from government, business, finance, global institutions sharing innovative, climate-smart solutions that are helping countries make a green, a more resilient, and a more inclusive transition. My personal highlight, though, I have to say, was the opening plenary on Tuesday and the conversations that it inspired. It was really inspiring to hear how countries are innovating on approaches that address climate and development goals together, because that's what we need, not separately, but together. Not only will that help shape sustainable development that is green, that's resilient, and that's inclusive, but it could also bring vital opportunities and support a peaceful and prosperous future, which I know came up during the workshops. And it was also fantastic to get the perspectives of Dr. Rani Al-Mashad, Minister of International Cooperation in Egypt, where the next COP, the COP27, will be hosted this coming November. And also let me also mention the powerful closing remarks of Plenary 2, which were given by Catherine McKenna, the former Minister of Environment and Climate Change for Canada. Catherine really brilliantly summed up the role carbon pricing needs to play in the just transition to a low carbon economy. Of course, there is more, but those are my sort of highlights.
Juergen, thank you very much for that. Questions from the audience in just a moment. But first, if you don't mind, this is the final time at this conference we're going to get to hear from our young climate innovators. And having listened to all of the excellent content on offer at this year's Innovate for Climate, this is what they had to say.
My name is Ahmed Samir. I am from Egypt and I live in the United Arab Emirates, the UAE.
My name is Firuze Alpaydın. I am from Istanbul, Turkey.
My name is Ariel Alverde. I am an architect and urban planner. I'm originally from Costa Rica.
For me, the success of COP27, which will be happening in my home country, Egypt, is mainly in 3 points. The first point is achieving and accelerating implementation of the different climate actions that were announced during the previous COPs, especially the last COP. We need to see more implementation of these announced initiatives and projects. The second is really to help secure more financing for emerging economies and countries in Africa and other nations as well. Without securing finances for those emerging economies, we cannot sustain or maintain to make sure that we have a sustainable and just energy transition. The third and very important point is really to recommit and even commit to higher targets for the clean energy transition globally, regionally, and locally in our countries, especially in emerging economies as well. Without higher targets, especially after the recent events, we will not be able to reach to the targets that we are supposed to reach to make sure that we are mitigating the challenges of climate change.
Phasing out to fossil fuel, not burning the coal and oil. These are all great wishes, but now is the time to be more realistic. Governments and companies are coming out with a record number of pledges. Now is the time to walk the talk. If we start seeing serious action plans instead of empty promises, I call it a success. If countries stop thinking only about their own transition and realize that fighting against climate change is not a zero-sum game, I call it a success. If companies stop seeing climate action as just a matter of reputation and integrate sustainability into their business strategy, I call it a success.
I would tell them that our future is urban. We know that in less than 30 years, most populations will live in urban areas where we have been already experiencing worrying and incremental climate impacts. We need top-down frameworks to address these issues, but also flexible enough to give space and resources for bottom-up solutions, since the climate crisis cannot be solved only from top-down structures. Citizens need to be heard, involved, and protected, especially those who fight against actors that need to be held accountable.
Wise words there, and I look forward to COP27 and beyond from our young climate innovators. And now, to you, our audience. You've been participating over 3 days, sending your questions in. Juergen is here to answer some of those for you now. So, Juergen, shall we start with this one? The current geopolitical landscape is on everybody's mind. For instance, on day one of Innovate for Climate, we had a workshop that focused on the contribution of climate finance to sustaining peace. Now, given the current context, how is World Bank Group supporting countries to respond to critical challenges that they're facing?
Well, thanks. Really great to hear from those the young climate innovators to call for action, which is exactly what we are discussing internally in the World Bank Group. Now, for our countries, broadly speaking, you have three massive and concurrent shocks that are taking place as we speak. First, you have the global pandemic, which has, of course, strained public health and public finance, and from which we've seen an uneven recovery. So some got hit a lot harder than others, and some find it a lot more difficult than others to come back. Second, the war in Ukraine, which has triggered a humanitarian crisis that's also fast becoming a food and fertilizer crisis. And third, the backdrop of a climate crisis that has not gone away and is getting worse. So each of these crises are impacting the poorest, the most, and the hardest. So we at the World Bank Group have a critical role to play in supporting our clients deal with these multiple crises simultaneously. Just last week, for instance, we announced $30 billion to support countries on critical food security issues. But more than just focusing on immediate needs, whether food security or disaster response, we also have to make sure that our investments also support longer-term sustainability. That means not only thinking about the short-term priorities, but how to really make sure you have a more sustainable, institutionalized approach that can build stronger, more resilient systems overall. It's absolutely essential that we connect this so that the solutions we help drive today bring immediate relief, because that's absolutely necessary right now, but also translate into making communities stronger and more resilient to future shocks. Now, this principle also applies to how we are supporting countries on climate, ensuring that it's mainstreamed across the economy and over the long term. And I was quite excited to learn that this topic came up in workshops over the last 3 days, because let's be very clear. This means rethinking inefficient subsidies. It's a huge opportunity so that existing public finance is more effective to start with. Right now, hundreds of billions of dollars every year are not put to efficient use and actually are not helping with the problems. Secondly, systematically working through how climate action intersects with development objectives by being clear about the political economy challenges and trade-offs, and managing them from the outset to ensure that the transition is just. We see all too often that good ideas, technical solutions, policy solutions are put in place just to fail because it hasn't been thought through properly right from the beginning, and the people weren't at the center of it. And then thirdly, undertaking a comprehensive, really whole-of-economy policy approach and strengthening macro, fiscal, and structural policies to get them ready for and also supportive of this ambitious climate action, including the enabling environment that can unlock the private capital for these investments, as we heard from our colleague from Spain. And our climate action plan released last year, you will remember, Anita, in June last year, we released our climate action plan, marks a similar shift for us, moving from a project-based approach to one that focuses on the greening of the entire economy, as well as ramping up support for countries to shape a much more green, a much more resilient, and a much more inclusive recovery. And now in our forthcoming country climate and development reports also support the system-wide institutional approach. This is a diagnostic and analysis that looks at how is a country impacted by climate change, what can it do to reduce its emissions, and what does it need to do to become more adapted to the impact and become more resilient. So because with the right policies in place and a firm institutional foundations, countries can unlock a low carbon resilient opportunity stream that delivers a safer climate and better development.
Juergen, you mentioned, when I asked you to pick a favourite, you mentioned the opening plenary, bringing together climate and development goals. And I think it's fair to say, isn't it, there's been a major takeaway message from this Innovate for Climate. On that very point, we have a question here from Afiz, who's in Nigeria, and he asks this: how can countries ambitiously regulate carbon emissions more and manage climate impacts? And how can they connect these actions to mitigate and adapt to a changing climate with their development needs? So I wonder, what is your perspective on how to make this work?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So the opening session really set the stage for a dynamic discussion on this topic, and all these points that was so well articulated in the questions are interconnected. So I'm really glad to know it came up in the workshops and now in the audience as well. First of all, we know that no country is immune from the impact of climate change. Second, we know that climate change is also fundamentally connected to development and poverty reduction. You cannot run those in parallel. It will push 130 million people into poverty if we don't act immediately in the next 10 years. There is no question that developed countries need to step up and do much more to reduce emissions. I think everyone's clear on that. But the challenge for developing countries is that they no longer have an opportunity to develop first in a high carbon intensive way and then clean up and decarbonize later. They need support today for both mitigation and adaptation to make investments now to slow a changing climate, enable billions to live safer, more prosperous and more inclusive lives. I did mention the country climate and development reports that we're working on, and they actually address the question that you just put in front of me. We will have over 20 of those coming out this year, and over the next 5 years, we will have them in probably all the countries we work in. What makes them especially valuable is that they will capture the interplay between the development objectives, such as poverty reduction, growth, inequality, and connects it with climate change and climate policies. So take, for instance, forestry in a given country. It's a sector that creates economic value and jobs. It also has significant mitigation potential. And it needs to adapt to climate change by investing in fire control. So a successful development policy has to combine all these aspects in a consistent strategy. I think that's the kind of insights that you will get out of these CCDRs. In the past, these conversations have often happened in parallel, in isolation, and weren't fully connected. Now, having this kind of consistent approach that looks at climate and development together can also help unlock climate finance and investments from the private sector, which is absolutely critical. So it can really help mobilize in an area of scarce resources the trillions of dollars, not billions, the trillions in new investment that will be needed for green, resilient, and inclusive growth. So excellent question. And if you cannot look at these things in isolation. You have to have a real comprehensive approach to this.
Thank you for a very comprehensive answer. Now, on this last day of Innovate for Climate, one of the discussions that's had an awful lot of engagement on social media and indeed in our question inbox as well has been the conversation on carbon markets and carbon pricing, particularly after the State and Trends of Carbon Pricing workshop on Tuesday. I know a lot of people watching this will have been to that. What are some of the things that you have heard at I4C that you're most excited about?
Well, it's hard to pick from the wide variety of topics that have been covered over the last 3 days. So let me maybe just pick a few, highlight some of the important themes. First of all, it's good to see the focus on the just transition. Let's be clear, at the end of the day, things will only change fast and in a sustainable way if it's with the people. It cannot be against the people, it has to be with the people. This is reflected not only in the bank's work on climate and energy transition, but also our carbon pricing work. How do you make sure, for instance, that carbon pricing measures account for the just transition? How can governments make use of the revenues that are generated to help communities that make the most, that may be the most affected, right? So you have to connect those two things if you want to make this work. It's not only about phasing out coal or putting a price on carbon, but also about creating new skills, new jobs in a more equal, resilient economy. That's when you have a chance of moving this agenda forward fast. And it's really good to see such a right conversation taking place at I4C this year on how to make this kind of policy work. Now, second, it's inspiring to see the focused technological innovations that can help leverage private capital in climate finance can have. So it was exciting to hear about digital sustainable bonds, to how satellite blockchain technologies are opening up carbon markets. So the technical innovation part, to me, I always call this innovation for a purpose. Not all innovation is actually helpful in the context that we're discussing here, but innovation for a purpose can actually be super helpful. And there were some really good examples there. And then finally, I was really excited to see such a wide range of actors covered, including everything from wide range of sectors covered, including everything from green buildings, agriculture and land use to blue carbon, and across countries at all stages of development. This actually really speaks to the extraordinary innovations that are helping transform economies around the world. And it's great to see the shared commitments to operationalizing the Glasgow Climate Pact. And I'm hopeful that these will bear fruit at COP27 on the horizon.
Juergen, thank you. Before we close Innovate for Climate 2022, I wonder, do you have any final reflections?
Well, thank you. I guess it's the moment to bring this year's I4C to a formal close. Let us continue the conversations that we started here, though. This should not be the end of the conversation. Again, this needs to continue on a daily basis until we really see the progress that we also desperately need. This is one of the defining issues of our time. And to solve it, we need to keep up the pressure on the scale and pace of the transition. And at the same time, we need to continue increasing support to countries on resilience and adaptation. We cannot just focus on mitigation, no matter how urgent it is, because countries and millions and hundreds of millions of people are already feeling the impact and they need our support. We at the World Bank do about 50% of our work on mitigation and 50% on adaptation. As we've heard from our speakers over the course of Innovate for Climate this year, we have no time to waste. It's critical that we invest in climate smart solutions now and share these widely for maximum replicability. And by using technology and innovative policy approaches, we can accelerate the just transition we need to see across key systems. And as I said over and over again, we cannot leave people behind. People and communities should be at the heart of our new climate smart economy. Now, with that said, we are looking forward to continue working with you as we deliver solutions that work for people and the planet. So thanks to all of you who have joined in this year's Innovate for Climate. Thank you to all participants, from the businesses blazing a trail of innovative solutions, to the investors financing their work, to the policymakers setting targets and sending bold signals about the direction of travel. So thank you all again for taking part in Innovate for Climate 2022.
And thank you, Juergen, for your reflections, for answering our audience questions, again, for being with us for this closing ceremony. Thank you very much. Well, I hope very much that I4C 2023 does take place in Barcelona next year. Wouldn't it be rather marvellous to have an in-person event again? I hope you've enjoyed these 3 days. It has been a real privilege to have been part of this conversation with you. Until next year, just keep sharing those ideas, those inspirations, those innovations, keep the momentum going. And while I bid you farewell, let me leave you with some of our favourite moments over the last 3 days. Go safe, go well, and I hope we meet again.
It is time.
Hello and welcome to Innovate for Climate 2022.
It's clear we need to act and to act fast.
The question is how to make sure that capital reaches profitable climate-smart opportunities.
It's really remarkable how much we have achieved and discussed, but how much more we still need to do.
Climate action is a development story. Within it, you can see the different projects that are also creating jobs, the impact on skill needs.
And by putting a price on pollution, as you all know, that creates the right incentives.
There is a future out there that is prosperous and green.
There is no shortcut. We need to work with people, and we need to be sure that these real projects are what the different stakeholders think is the best option for their own present, for their own future.
I don't need to tell this group, of course, how important carbon pricing can be as a policy to help countries achieve green, resilient, and inclusive growth.
It is widely accepted that carbon pricing is an increasingly cost-effective mechanism for incentivizing and discouraging what is now free carbon pollution.
A stable and predictable carbon price that recognizes the need for flexibility through incentives and subsidies is required to deliver on any climate goals.
My name is Ahmed Samir. I am from Egypt and I live in the United Arab Emirates, the UAE.
My name is Sarah Al-Harthi and I am from Saudi Arabia.
My name is Firuze Alpaydın. I am from Istanbul, Turkey.
We have an opportunity, one that comes along rarely, to really build the kind of future we want, one that is clean, green, sustainable, and resilient.
It is time.